All right, so welcome everyone to the Sparked HL7AU eRequesting TDG meeting for Thursday, the 24th of October, 2024. What are we doing today? We are going to quickly do business from previous meetings and review the upcoming events, and then I'll be handing over to Michael. Michael's going to be talking about the results of the recent block votes, and then going through some more ballot for comment resolution issues. And that will be the subject matter for today. So first of all, let's have a quick look at the agenda minutes for the 10th of the 10th. Those are located here in the Confluence space. Would anyone like to motion to approve those?
I can motion to approve them. I wasn't here, but I did watch the meeting and read the minutes.
And would someone be interested in seconding that?
This was our last TDG meeting, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Great. Thank you very much. So motion by Michael, seconded by Angus. You should see a poll on your screen to approve minutes from the previous meeting. All right, we'll wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. And those have been approved. 16 affirmative, 7 abstained. All right, so we have some action items as well listed there. Does anyone have an update on any of the action items?
I don't think any of them have been, except the bottom one's complete. It was raised in the last meeting and is complete. The others are still there from an earlier meeting, and I don't think we're going to get back to task until we finish ballot reconciliation. So I think they're just sitting there until we kind of get through ballot.
Pending, essentially, till we can work on them. Yep, okay, great. So let's quickly go over upcoming events. We've got 2 events coming up that if you don't already know about, you might be interested in. So the first one is the Sparked Co-Design Workshops in Melbourne. This is an in-person only event, so it looks like there'll be no remote option for this. On the 20th is the Clinical Design Group meeting, which technical people are welcome to attend, but it's the Clinical Design Group. And then on the 21st is the AU eRequesting TDG meeting, so this group for a full day. As the notes say, this is the last opportunity for an in-person eRequesting Sparked event for some time. I don't know what that means, but I can only assume that means there isn't another one planned at the moment.
I think so that the AU patient summary is sort of kicking off later this year, and it's going to consume a lot of the Sparked event sort of time. So
yep.
Yeah, so we're trying to get this one in for eRequesting before patient summary comes in and potentially consumes a lot of Spark time and resources.
Yep.
So with this, the clinical design group on the 20th is sold out, but there is a wait list. You can do the wait list through Eventbrite. The TDG day, which is for us, is not sold out yet. If it does sell out, nominate to go on the wait list. TDG members will get preference on that wait list. So I think this is a really important day if you can make it for us, because we're going to just finalize anything that's left over ballot for comment. But the big ticket item is actually refining the scope and planning for release 1. So to date, we've only worked on ServiceRequest and task, and we really need to lock down, well, what else needs to be in release 1, and what process do we need to go through to get what we need in release 1. So that'll be important for planning where we go from here with eRequesting.
So if you have a burning issue that you need to get addressed for release 1, this is the time to do it. And if you can't be there, I think maybe let someone in the Sparked team know about it so we can try and get it on the agenda. All right, and then the next event, which is currently sold out, is the Fire Connectathon, which is held also in Melbourne on the 12th and 13th of December at Melbourne Connect. So that's there as well. and you can contact events at hl7.com.au to go on the wait list for that if you would like to attend. All right, Michael, would you like me to hand over to you?
Yep, happy for you to hand over to me.
Okay.
So I can share. I need to get sharing permission.
Yep.
I've requested. No, I think got that one there. How that works. Got the screen.
Yep.
Manage all my windows. Okay. So we've had a couple of e-votes go out for e-requesting. I did notice in the chat then that Craig mentioned that he had some trouble logging in. You can always reach out to a co-chair if you're having any issues with voting on these e-votes, and we'll try and help you out. But we've had 3 e-votes to date, and we've probably got one more to come after this meeting. So this is just to summarize the outcome of those e-votes. So the first one was block vote 1, which was informative changes to the Are You Requesting via IG. I'll just show people that one. Get my window. Let's see. Yeah. So this had just a number of informative changes about the wording and the like in the IG. So there was 9 items in that. It ran from 26th September to the 4th of October, and there was 13 affirmative votes for that. So that one has passed. I'll then jump to, we had block vote 2, which was released following last fortnight's meeting. That one there. Again, it only had, I think, 3 items in it here, where that has passed as well with an affirmative vote of 17. And back. And then we had block vote 3, which were items that we're deferring as considered for future use. So these things we're not going to look at right now, but we will look at again in the future. So these items, these issues stay there waiting for us to sort of bring them back in to look at a future point in time. And that one also had a vote of 17 affirmative, and that one has passed. Are there any questions or comments about any of the e-voting outcomes or process or anything there? The general criteria that co-chairs are using to put something in a block vote is normally something that's not too contentious. It's to sort of allow people to review them in their own time rather than in a meeting and get them through, because if we bring everything to a meeting, we will be here a very long time. But if anyone looks at anything that's in a block vote that they think needs discussion at a meeting, you just tag it as this requires telecon, which means it'll be brought to a meeting. We'll take it out of the block vote, so it won't be voted on in that, and then we'll bring it to a meeting to discuss. So just because it's in a block vote doesn't mean it has to stay there. We can pull it out if there's anything that needs to be discussed. So the rest of this meeting is going back into further ballot comment resolution. I'm just going to give an update on where we are with our current status of the reconciliation. So in the ballot for comment, there was 55 JIRA issues raised. The co-chairs have triaged 50 of those. So we've only got 5 left. So we're 90% of the way through triage. Reconciliation, which basically means there's been a vote or it's been determined out of scope or referred to another working group. We've got done 34 out of 55 of those. We'll go through a few more in this meeting. There'll be another block vote. So that number will keep going up over the next couple of meetings. The target here is to get to 100% by the end of that TDG day in Melbourne. So within the next 4 weeks. We'll see. Hopefully we can get there. We'll definitely get through triage in the next week, I would expect. and then reconciliations bring it to TDGs, e-votes, and the like to finish those. Applied is actually the changes being physically made in our IG so that you can see them. There's a bit of a backlog there on those because AU Base, AU Core are also going through Ballot at the moment, and they're Ballot for working standards, so they're getting a bit of priority over ours. But those changes will come through. The IG developers will work through the changes and apply them. We'll start seeing that number go up when they get to them. Oh, the wrong way. So these are the items that we're going to look at going through today. I'm not sure whether we'll get through them all or not. Depends on how far the discussion goes. The first two are carryover from the last meeting, and the others are new ones. So I just wanted to talk about the first one. We went a little bit out of process in the last meeting. So the normal process for bringing items to a TDG meeting is that a week before the TDG, the co-chairs will send out an email saying these are the agenda items for the next meeting. So you've seen emails probably come from me that have said they've basically been reminders about the e-votes, and there's also been a link there to the agenda for the next meeting, which you'll see when I bring it up. This is where our minutes are, but prior to them being minutes, this is so for today, this is the agenda, which are the things we're bringing to this meeting, including these ballot comment dispositions. So this gives people the opportunity to, if you want to make sure you come to the meeting because you're really interested in this item, or you can't attend a meeting and you want to flag it to say, hey, I'm really interested in meeting in this issue, but I can't make the meeting. Can we do it in a different meeting? And gives you a chance to understand what these are about before the meeting, so that it's not new to you when you come to a meeting. So for the last meeting, there was this first item, which was about the mandatory patient class, which was voted on, and it was voted as persuasive in the last meeting, but it wasn't on the agenda. So just wanted to give people the opportunity to say, to understand that we didn't follow the proper process, give people the opportunity to say, yeah, I think maybe we need to revisit this and hold another vote or the like. I'll just talk about that process too. If we do decide we want to revisit the decision, we recognise that it these are from the HL7 AU decision-making practices. So it's recognised that previous made decisions inhibits progress and they should be discouraged, but that said, there's circumstances that may exist to warrant reopening. So that's why I'm just bringing up today, saying we didn't follow proper process, so there might exist the criteria to revisit it. If we do want to revisit it, we need to have a formal motion, a second, and 2/3 majority of the vote to say that, yeah, we need to revisit it. So I'll just bring this item up just so we remember what it was about and what the vote was. So this was about mandatory patient class, and the resolution here was to modify the cardinality of the base service request encounter property from 0 to 1 to 1 to 1 to ensure all service requests must reference an encounter resource. The vote in the last meeting was 19 affirmative, 2 negative, and 10 abstain. So we have voted on it. The vote will stand unless someone would like to motion that we need to revisit this item because we didn't follow the proper process prior to that meeting. So happy for anyone to do that if they think that's the case, but otherwise we can let it rest with that resolution. Not hearing anyone, so hopefully that means we can just accept that vote and move on.
So that's what we're saying.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, that's good. I think it's, sorry, yeah.
So Michael, can we move 47007 in this list, be the next one, because it has correlation to that one we just talked about, and I have shocking new news.
Sure, happy to do that. So There's also the item that was discussed in the last one, which is the 46939, which we'll try and get a decision on here. And the missing data are not allowed. If we get to it, we'll do it late in the meeting as well, because I think it would be great if Heath was around when we talk about that one. He's not available in the early part of the meeting. He doesn't have to be, but if he is, we'll leave that one to later. So I'm happy if we go into 47007 unless someone else thinks there's one we want to address first. No. Okay, let's jump into that. All right. So this item here, this issue is being raised as a work group of Sonic Healthcare. So that's you, Angus, in response to the eRequesting implementation guide. Ballot. We would like to request that billing advice in the form of a code be made mandatory for each diagnostic request. At a minimum, this would be a set of codes such as bulk bill, private, DPA concession. However, future expansion of this set, where required, would also be acceptable. We do not agree with the suggestion that presence or absence of Medicare number or DVA number identifies it as an acceptable way to drive request billing. Some requests may be intended to be privately billed, yet contain Medicare DVA numbers. Conversely, other requests can be marked bulk billed and Medicare number sorted by historical records from the patient as they present for collection or imaging. Furthermore, Medicare and DVA numbers are now seen as critical identification points for IHI resolution. We do not want them omitted to signal private billing, in turn jeopardize the patient's identification and possible My Health record uploading. So this is about proposed fire concept, ServiceRequest insurance, coverage type, and a value set, including these items.
So I want to take it all back.
You want to take it back?
So this has been an embarrassing journey for us. So with the Magentis interface, we made this mandatory. We made it mandatory based on our interface spec said it was mandatory, and all our labs were quite on board that it was mandatory. But subsequently, we've had Magentis customers at scale complain that they shouldn't have to pick a billing choice, that there should be a choice of no choice.
Mm-hmm.
Magentis has provided that feedback to us, then that's gone up our chain to our CEO, and it's come back down that it should be optional. So really reversing, the second paragraph, we would like to request billing advice in the form of consent be made mandatory. And withdrawing our request.
Okay, so you're actually going to withdraw this issue?
I think so. I think what we're now really pushing for is that it is optional, which is I think where we were, and that we probably should have never put this request in.
Okay. We could, I suppose, if Brett or someone else on the call wants to, I think we've probably got two options here, but one is, I suppose, we do vote on it being and see if the rest of the group decides it's not persuasive, or you actually withdraw the issue and it's no longer a ballot issue.
Yeah, I think withdrawing it is probably fine. I don't think there's anything in here, like we talked about the value set. The value set still stands. Like we still want people to be able to choose from the value set.
Yep.
I don't think we want to add a value to the value set that is nothing. So, I think nothing would be the absence of a billing code.
So what's the interpretation of nothing from, is it not chargeable? What's the interpretation?
It's up to what the lab wants to do. That, and this is why it's been very hard conversation internally at Sonic, because different labs do different things.
I mean, in where we do our stuff in terms of requesting and other types of patient billing, not selecting a financial class is essentially the same concept here. In the AET space, we in the integration layer basically interpret a value of no selection as a choice. But that means that, through the process of what we do, say during an inpatient stay, that may be changed at some point during that whole stay. So how does a similar concept happen within the space of here is at the start of the request, they might not know, but at some point they may.
Well, up until, I'd argue that, and we're still working through this, that they can update the request up until collection. Once collection has occurred, we're locked
Yeah.
in to something.
Andy?
Yeah.
Given this is MustSupport, and we're going to MustSupport optional, I think one of the things we need to be extremely clear about is that this is not a contractual billing obligation that is being presented, that the billing is a recommendation or a to be considered billing option, and that this may or may not result in that action being taken by the filler.
Yeah, we support that as well. So just because you say Medicare doesn't mean we will.
Okay.
So what's been the feedback from the Magenta user base in regards to why they don't want to select billing preference?
Would you like me to read some of them? We would request that we would request that you please.
I'm happy you want to send that to me offline.
The reason for it is there's a number of aspects to it. One is traditionally they never had to select. There was never an option in the user interface to select a billing option. So when we went towards to eRequesting, we have then common eRequesting user interface for radiology and pathology. So it kind of pushed this issue at the user. We started defaulting to, because we had agreed early on with Sonic that it was mandatory. We had started defaulting, and that doesn't work. In fact, that's a really bad option to default to something. So there was some reaction against default. As much as there was, why are you making me do this? I have no information to provide. Now, the reasoning that we've kind of given to our customers is that where there are circumstances that you're aware of with the patient that would provide some guidance, interpreted guidance from the clinician to the filler about the appropriateness of a billing consideration, then you should be able to do that. And our clinicians generally agree with that. So they're happy, optional, don't make me choose something, don't default. There are others that actually do default and want that default value to be something that can be supported. So it all boils down to just make it optional, because we don't always have any information, and choosing something can actually be outside of information we hold or have a recommendation about.
I also, in response to this, went and looked at best practices ordering screens that are live today, and they, in their billing options, have an option of not set. So Medicare DVA concession not set. So that's.
Thank you.
The other thing to note is this is 0 to many. So it's not 0 to 1. It is allowing you to then potentially select multiple billing options. So for instance, you could go in and go, DVA and bulk bill, for instance. I don't know what the logic is behind that. Maybe you're unsure. Maybe you just tick all boxes and go, that's your problem now. I don't know, but it is probably something that the implementation guide should give some guidance around and context for, because otherwise it's just going to be a bit of a Wild West.
Yeah, we currently don't have a way of supporting many. Like, we'd have to, as it funnels down into our list, it ends up being one. Not to say.
And I think we in our eRequesting implementation guide, we have made it 0 to 1 now. So there wasn't, I couldn't see the use case for having multiple.
And I asked Michael to talk about this one post the one we just talked about patient class. Patient class, the other ticket, was also sort of pushing for billing reasons. We need patient class, we need it mandatory, blah, blah, blah. But patient class is a little different in that it is mandatory in the old specs. I still would argue that there is always a context to the request you're creating. So whilst this one, fully happy to withdraw, the other one, I'm more reluctant to withdraw because I still think there is a patient class context, and there is in the current interfaces it's mandatory, whereas as we're finding, this one wasn't actually mandatory in the current interfaces, even though it was documented that it was.
It's patient class, but in essence, it's an encounter type.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to leave this one then for Angus to withdraw.
Could I
Yeah,
weigh in on that process?
absolutely. That's I was hoping you were there.
We have a number of people that have voted on this ticket. So Angus will find that he is unable to withdraw this item because there's votes cast against it.
Yep.
So our options are we proceed to vote as non-persuasive because we don't think it's necessary, and that just becomes the resolution for the ticket, and we request all these people to withdraw their votes later, or we get everyone to try and do this and let Angus retract this ticket. So it's I think it might be actually better to vote non-persuasive and just record that as the outcome, and you can note that Angus says we don't need to do this, and then that will get us to being able to resolve that ticket, and then we'll be asking people to withdraw their negatives on that.
Yep.
So I think we've.
I mean, if there is consensus too, affirming the decision that it's not, we shouldn't make it mandatory is probably a good thing.
Yeah, for draft as well. Like even withdrawing these negatives is not that important because we're not publishing a final standard, so your vote's going to remain negative unless you withdraw it, right? But it is. We'll get the right result on the ticket. Yeah.
Angus, do you want to make a motion that it's not persuasive?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion that it's not persuasive. It's quite bizarre that I'm motioning against my own. But yes, I understand the logic behind why. Is it possible to am I able to edit? Like, I feel like the initial, I don't know, it does seem very contradictory that we're putting it there, and then I don't know whether the ticket needs to state something about our wish to withdraw it, and but
you can make that in you can put that in the resolution, like you put that in the resolution that the Razor thinks this is not necessary. But the thing is, like, in reality, everyone that voted on it has to agree, right? So it's it requires everyone to go and adjust their votes.
You haven't been very persuasive all the way through this discussion. I think it's the right answer.
Can we do the not persuasive with mod to include need to put a robust definition of what using this implies for the filler? So, for instance, I just want to be quite explicit because we get lots of questions in terms of implementers who want to be clear that this is not a contractual thing in the service request, because the rest of the service request is contractual in nature, whereas this one is not.
Yeah. Do you want to motion something? I can type in.
We can invent on the fly just to say that the provision of a insurance attribute describes a recommendation to be considered by the filler when billing for this service, and does not guarantee that this recommendation will be satisfied.
So this is actually, we need, before that, the reason for it being not persuasive is that what do we actually say? So
the proposer no longer
make
stands behind this proposal and
based on user experience with Magenta.
Making insurance,
Our assertion is not
insurance,
it's
but the reasoning you had, making it mandatory does not allow, or it's basically saying you have to provide value, right? When there is no,
it forces a recommendation where the user has no recommendations.
has no recommendation.
Has no recommendation
to make.
A lot of these things have to do with workflow, right? So you may not be privy to the information at the time of starting a request. So you might know it later, before collection, but not at the start. And this is the same we have in lots of instances in the EMRs where admin staff don't know all the answers, don't have the patient in front of them or whatever. So you prevent workflow by making sure it's mandatory that they can't simply answer.
I don't say provide additional guidance in the IJ for insurance.
The other thing we should consider around this is also the obligation which might come with a recommendation. For instance, is there any point in recommending bulk build if you don't provide an IHI or a Medicare number?
Sorry, what was that? You want me to add some words here?
Well, we need to consider making this more robust. For instance, we shouldn't, I think, allow for the recommendation of DVA billing, for instance, if you don't provide a DVA identifier.
Yeah, you could use these values as other additional validation logic for other fields, right?
Yeah, so the subject of the service request, if the, just an invariant that says if you select these billing insurance options, then you must, the invariant says you must also include things. The DVA one's pretty straightforward. The question is, I don't know, do you already carry the identifier so you don't need to have it in the request? But I don't think that's very robust.
Did you want to make that what you're doing here, or raising the ticket?
Is that even 100% true? Like we have old records. Like you can say, oh, I want Medicare build. Oh, we don't have the Medicare number. Please try and Medicare build. Now, when it comes to us, we go, well, you had a blood test last week and you had a Medicare number then, so.
Oh, well, that's the question. I'm happy to just note that. We at this point I won't suggest anything additional. Stick it through later.
Are you happy with this position as your proposal, Andy? Or Angus, whoever wants to propose it.
I'm happy with that, and I think
I'm happy to second it.
Yeah, I'll first it then.
So launch a poll for that.
So this is not persuasive with modification. So it's not persuasive as making insurance mandatory forces a recommendation when the placer has no recommendation to make. And because we're doing not persuasive with modification, the modification we're going to make is provide additional guidance in the IG for insurance that the provision of insurance described a recommendation to be considered by the filler and does not guarantee that this recommendation will be satisfied. The bottom of the bottom part is just a note about reference to another item, which we'll talk about next.
So we're
Okay.
affirming that it's not persuasive.
Yes, we're voting it's not persuasive. So we're saying we're not going to make that change that was requested. We'll just make this other minor change about guidance.
Yes, so if you are voting that we make the guidance non-persuasive.
Yeah, an affirmative vote
Affirmative
is
vote, yeah.
an affirmative vote is meaning you agree that it's not persuasive, and based on this
You're
resolution,
voting on the text on screen.
Agree with what you see, yeah.
You're agreeing,
agreeing with what you see
disagreeing.
on the screen.
Yeah.
But all confusing. Awesome. All right, so we're currently at 73% of participants, and I'm going to close this in a moment. If you don't wish to vote, you don't understand the vote, or you wish to not to vote, you can click abstain. Right, we're going to close that one off in 3, 2, 1. And that one is approved. 21 affirmative, 5 abstained.
We might, Angus, jump to the other one that is related to this. This about specifying the payment information.
The value set.
While we're in this space, we might as well keep talking about it. So this is talking about insurance, the same element. And this is AU-based coverage is insufficient to cover an interoperable set of payment options. In addition, the expected semantics of payment info needs to be defined. Suggestion versus obligation of choice. A new AU eRequesting coverage profile is needed. So I'll talk about the resolution description we've got proposed here, and then I'll walk you through it in the IG. But we're saying potentially here that the eRequesting coverage requires alignment to commonly used payment models for diagnostic requesting. So pay for private payment, concession and concessional fee, public healthcare, bulk bill, and DVA. So we will propose creating a new minimum coverage value set in AU eRequesting, create a new AU eRequesting diagnostic request coverage profile based on AU-based coverage, add an additional binding minimum to the new AU eRequesting coverage profile referencing the 4-code value set, and change the AU eRequesting service request insurance reference to the new AU eRequesting coverage profile. So there's a lot there. I'll just walk you through it. So what we've been talking about here is still, this is on the AU eRequesting service request profile. So this is the abstract profile that pathology and imaging inherit from. And we have insurance on that. And it currently references AU base coverage. So if we jump to AU base coverage, all that AU base does is actually add some identifiers to the base coverage. But what we're talking about in here is, I'll get a snapshot, is type and coverage categories such as medical or accident. It's got a binding to coverage type and self-pay codes as preferred. If we have a look at that, that has a whole heap of things in here. And a lot of them aren't necessarily relevant for us in Australia.
And that's a big thrust of this request, is to, rather than present this massive list of people to choose from where our 4 codes are in it, we want to just present the 4 codes.
Yeah. So the proposal is to create a new coverage profile, which will live in eRequesting, and we will create a new value set and bind it to type, which will only have the So create a new AU requesting diagnostic request coverage profile based on AU base coverage. So we're still going to inherit from AU base, but we're going to create our own profile within eRequesting for coverage. We're going to add a minimum binding to eRequesting coverage profile that references the 4 value set code, which would be pay private, concessional, public healthcare, and DVA. I'll explain minimal. So these are our binding strengths that we have available to us. What we're proposing is, where's minimum defined?
There's such a thing as minimum.
Is it under?
It's not the standard. It's one of the extensions. But
Yeah.
why aren't we just using extensible?
Yeah, that's interesting point.
Yeah,
Because extensible would work. It means you can use other codes, but if what you're referencing is in the set, you should use it. Otherwise, you can use something else if we need to. We want to change that? Does anyone
I agree.
Anyone know why minimum was put in there?
I agree with extensible, but I have no idea what minimal means.
Yeah, well,
Minimum is more useful when you have a more complex set of binding obligations you want to wrap around a code, and then you can use minimum along with a bunch of the other ones, and that makes more sense. But I don't know, Brett, what your idea is on this, but I don't know whether, you know, what we're doing collectively is moving away from using the standard bindings to that extension set. I don't know.
This does say additional binding. This falls under additional binding. So
yeah,
I think private payment's pretty broad. What does it really mean?
That'll be the reason why minimum.
Yeah,
so that if you were going to use
this
concession, for instance, like I don't know whether we're in the 4 including concession, but if you were going to use concession, then you should actually be getting it from the binding set, which also includes other things like insurance and other random acts of violence.
Is this the concept of like 2 codes, Andy? Like where you have the hierarchy? Is that what it's saying?
No.
No,
It's just saying that at a minimum, you must support these 4.
Yeah.
But there is a binding to a broader code set, and if you're going to do something else, then start picking from this other code set. If we just said preferred is this code set, we kind of wouldn't get necessarily the 4 always supported, and we kind of said we always want the 4 supported. If you're going to do anything else, then go from the preferred set.
So on that, so what we'd be looking at here, sorry, I lost my window. On the type, we would leave the existing binding here as preferred. That would stay there, and we would add another binding. As you can see up here on language, there's an additional binding here, and we would do that additional binding to our new value set with a type of minimum. And that minimum says the minimum allowable value set. Any conformant system shall support these codes. So it'll say you have to support these 4. You can support others that are in that value set, but everyone has to support these 4.
Did you want to take your binding to the value set up to extensible though for the? Or no?
Does it need to, given that we've got this is an additional binding? Because you're actually going to, your extensible part is on the original binding. As long as
and the original binding is preferred only.
Yeah.
So would you take yours up to extensible so that you have to use the codes from that value set if you're not doing those 4 codes? I mean, you do those 4 codes because you have to, but any of the other codes that are in that value set, are you requiring people to use those codes if they do it? That's the question. So if you do something that's not in those 4,
is there a future here where
use those?
Is there a future here where this value set is going to get populated with all our insurance companies like HBF, MBF, blah 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 blah?
I think that's a different code
I would
system.
think that would be a different type. This is more like
Yeah.
a payer type,
Is that
not the payer, which is your insurance health fund code. So there's different ways of looking at this from a billing perspective in terms of categorization and how you direct a user to make selections.
so if you look at the coverage resource, you've got type, which is what we've been talking about. So
I think the four are actually a bit too small itself.
So
Private is too broad. I'm not sure that the right ones you might want, like compensable, of which there are several types of compensable, where you go for those additional detail if you wanted to use one of the other codes.
But those four are the minimum, right? So you have to support those four because they're a minimum requirement. So it has to be mini.
But I don't understand what private
self-pay.
Private pay would be self-pay is one part of private. Compensable is another part. So to me, private pay actually is someone else paying that's not one of the other funders, right? Medicare, DVA.
Yeah, I think
it means we're going
needed.
to go to the patient and make you pay. Now, if you present a private health insurance and say, "Oh, my health insurance," then that's fine. But we're not going to go to Medicare. We're not going to DVA. We're not going. And concessional
it's actually self-pay. Whether they're subsequently insured to get coverage by someone else who pays on their behalf is another thing.
Correct. I don't think private insurance is actually part of the list for pathology and radiology at the moment.
So we don't currently support a long list of insurance company codes. I'm not saying we shouldn't. And
that's a different field.
Yeah. Okay. Where is that different field?
This is
That's a detail.
Usually we see a difference. There's a differentiation between private and self-funded.
That's the actual funder. That I can't remember the actual element, but it's actually who is the payer.
Yeah. So in terms of insurance, if you go back to V2, that's in your IN1 segment. Your financial class is in your PV1 segment, and your who might actually fork out the dollars is in your guarantor segment, your DD1 segment. So there are three separate things. And just because you have insurance, which tells you I have insurance, doesn't mean you're electing to use your insurance.
There's also a class, so you can actually say, what strength of insurance you got, level of insurance.
So
but
pay
all this
or
saying is what type it is for starts.
So pay or here is where you'd put your MPF, HPF
Correct.
in the long run. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's broad categories, right? That we have talked about this in the firework group a little bit too, just about making sense of what's in that value set in terms of Australian concepts. Like, how do you know? How would you say traffic accident commission? How would you say
even outpatient's not? It's ambulatory. It's just not what we're used to.
Yeah, but these are high level concepts, right? So they're not. These are classes really of coverage. Yeah.
So just back on this, I think there's definitely some advantage of us creating a eRequesting coverage profile, because that means that we can adapt this over time to what we need it to be for eRequesting. This is like the first step to say, hey, let's create one. Now it's within the realm of eRequesting, so now we can adapt it as we need. So is there debate what goes in this minimum set? Because again, what we're saying here is minimum, that everyone has to support this, but we can support others. You can use others. It's not saying you have to use one. We're just saying everyone should support these four. It will still be bound to that original value set, which again has a lot of stuff in it that people could use. So I think they're the 2 points we just need to make sure we agree with. David?
I guess I was just trying to make sure we're clear about, we're talking about a payment transaction, or are we talking about the arrangement the person's got into with their health insurance company, right?
This is the guidance we provide on the last one, that is the recommendation, right? It's not a contract for payment.
The recommendation is in the context of its use in service request. The coverage resource itself is has a broader kind of use, and what we're just talking about is the type. So it's only giving you the family of coverage. There is other attributes that link to the payer, link to further insurance details, and all sorts of other things that you could potentially put in there. I think that, as Brad said, if you look at the value set that is provided, it's quite US centric for some of the categorizations, but I think we're not in a position at the moment to have a full Australian version of this. So I'm not sure I'm not sure what else we could do in this. Unless there's a really strong argument for a fifth or a sixth or something, that going, no, this is absolutely needed. From our experience at the moment, these four are sufficient for community e-requesting in production. We not really run into anyone who said, I couldn't possibly use this.
My question, I guess, was more around packaging up the requesting concept with the payment concept. Like they seem to be tightly coupling them by.
So, David, the existing forms that are being printed by the GP systems usually have a checkbox at the bottom, which basically indicates to the lab what they would expect to get, how they would expect to get paid. So it is literally 3 checkboxes. Is something along the lines of private, which actually means self-pay, concession, and bulk bill. DBA is kind of the 4th one that is common as well, but not necessarily on these printed forms.
Right.
I mean, there's another common one, which is military, which is not a DVA payment, but it's actually that. Yeah. So there are ways of covering other things, but I just don't know whether, we would need, I think, strong consensus agreement that there was a good case to, put that in. And I don't know if there's enough implementation experience to show that, because all we're kind of building off.
Very specialised around the Defence Department.
Yeah.
All of those would come under concession, guys. All of those would come under concession.
They're not on concession. Concession is something else. These all come in terms of a private payment. It's not being billed directly to the government. It is an organisation paying, right? It's not the government. The Department of Defence, who pay for people who are injured on, say, military bases, attending a public hospital or anywhere else, getting pathology requested to somewhere else, are not the government. They are an organisation, an employer.
So the concession is self-pay, but please let them pay less, is basically that statement.
No, that's the same as if I go to IMED and have radiology, and they say, yes, Medicare are paying part of it, but you're paying all of it up front.
Concession
it's up to you to claim it, right? They make the claim on your behalf, but the patient is paying.
We treat concession like go easy on them. And effectively what we do is we pay
you have a different charge rate.
We charge you Medicare rates as opposed to our private rate. But we don't charge Medicare. We're charging you the rate we would charge Medicare.
Yeah. So is this about a rate or is it about who?
It's akin to private. It's like a private and go soft on me.
Yeah, but is this data element about the rate on which you're going to charge or the who you're going to charge?
It's who in general, but then the concession is like a little bit extra further. It's a specialization at the moment of private, which is to basically say, please go easy on them because they're a 75-year-old or they're
but that's
disabled.
To me, that's a separate attribute. About whether you apply a concession is a separate attribute.
This is that attribute in the fire spec.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
But that's, I mean, we're That's making the actual implementation a lot more confusing, because we've now got 2 places to go. I agree with you in principle, that would be one way to model it, but we've chosen to basically use a specialization of the self-pay at the moment, to basically say self-pay and concession.
Okay. Does someone want to make a motion for this?
The only other thing I see missing here is what Andy said before about the cardinality of it. Like, I don't know if I want to address, like at the moment it's one to many, but that would be difficult for me. I just don't know whether we should, got a few dot points there. Do we leave cardinality as many, or is that something we add here?
We can add it if that's what we want to propose. Does anyone support, does anyone think there's a use case to support multiple? Does anyone think there would be a good reason to have multiple, have more than one?
This conversation in the past, we decided that we would leave it open at this time. I think there's one thing is whether we want the profile. I think it's a distinct thing. I wouldn't be trying to overlap this with cardinality. If I understand this one, basically Andy's saying we just need something that's a bit more constrained from a profile perspective.
Because all we don't want to end up with is people interpreting for the Australian context this value set, which is not obvious how some of that, and the discussion we've just had, it's not obvious what those interpretations should be, and then we would end up with kind of fragmentation. These 4 are the 4 basics of existing practice. And that's why we kind of put these forward, you know, maybe as we're using this going forward, that there will emerge consensus around other frequent required codings for Australia.
I mean, that's part of the process of getting this to a working standard, though, as well, is we do actually have to test the specification, right? We have to go through a testing phase of this specification and start using it. And that's where some of these things might flush out as well, where we do need extra or changes to some of these things. So,
but you said but you're talking cardinality, and I thought you were just saying that there's 4 options. So cardinality is naturally multiple.
No, we're not.
Just talking about value set
now, just the value set.
We went back to the value set.
The value set, and in the value set, you're talking about what are the valid values in the values.
I was talking about cardinality of the insurance resource itself. The whole container that holds all the information is one to many from the service request. So that you could give me multiple coverage resources, each with different, you know, that's the way it is now. And yet we would struggle with that, like, because we just don't have a multi thing in our system. We expect one or none. But I can also see a future where, you know, you can say I don't mind if you bulk bill them or this or that, and then we make a choice. It's just not what we do today.
What I'm hearing here is that we're actually getting bogged down in the detail. What I think the motion should be in the lines of, do we need a profile? And if so, we'll do that later and have further discussion. Obviously, this is quite detailed about what is going to be the initial profile, which I'm happy with, but that's where we're struggling, I think, to get to a motion.
Well, it's already conflating the profile with the value set, so yeah.
I think the value set and things like that is a rationale for the recommendation. But it sounds like there's a lot of people that want to have their say about what that profile looks like, and maybe.
I think that's true. I think we might all agree that the AU base is insufficient, but I don't think what is being proposed in terms of the 4 is sufficient. So maybe we need to tackle that at a different time. But if we say we need a different profile because the AU base is insufficient, we might all agree with that. But do we all agree on the 4 is the right thing? I don't think we do.
So what I see here is 4 dot points. The first one seems pretty reasonable to me. New minimal coverage value set. spreading differently to what I thought it was.
Yeah.
The second
I
point
think
the second point,
right? That's the key thing here is that can we get agreement that we want a coverage eRequesting?
if we make that decision, though, we haven't put anything to make it any different. We haven't specified anything different about this profile from AU base. We're saying we want one, but we haven't said it's going to have anything different. So
the post-op point also says that there is a new minimal. We're not saying what's in the values. The third dot point says there's 4 codes. Maybe we can strike out the 4 codes bit.
Well, but if we go to implement this, like as in, how would we work out what's in that base set? That has to be done separately.
Exactly, and that's I guess what
we're
getting to, isn't it? That we need more work. I mean, for me, this is actually future use, future consideration, probably.
I think that's what you're saying. Actually, is this is considered for future use? Is what you're saying.
Effectively, I see it a little bit stronger than that. That yes, we recognise that we need to do it, but the actual details that we've worked out, workshop further.
I think the additional ones could certainly be future work, but we need something to start with. If we have no direction on, for instance, how you represent bulk bill, then we're basically kind of taking coverage off the table, saying we're not going to cover the use of coverage. There is no billing guidance provided with this. And while I agree that making this more open for experience of use, but at some point you've got to create something that is actually implementable. And at the moment, we're kind of saying, well, you're on your own, just make it up. And after a few years of implementation experience, as I say, these are completely usable going forward.
Yeah, I think there's another ticket mentioned in the comments that AU Base, the fire work group's going to look at on the 6th of November for 7190, which is strictly a guidance ticket. So that's like, how do we interpret certain codes in this set? And there's been some chats about that, and I guess is waiting on this at some stage too. So yeah, so that is general advice on what do these codes mean, and that will probably end up in AU Base as narrative, in terms of how to interpret those codes. But I think you guys need to decide if these 4 codes are definitely in scope and everyone's going to do them. I think it's fair to say they're a minimum set because you expect everyone to do them, and you can expand on that going forward.
I think the other ticket sets us up well, right? We get our own coverage that we can now manipulate as we wish. We get our own value set, which we got 4 values in, where we have complete right tomorrow to add more codes to that set if we need to. It's a big step forward from where we are now, which is we have no control of the coverage resource, and we have a code set that has 30 codes in it.
And AU Base will provide the guidance as well for some of these codes.
Sounds like a motion. Yes.
Yeah.
Go back. I'll motion. Yeah.
Are you motioning as it reads?
I'll motion as it is. Yeah.
That motion.
Do we have a second?
I'm happy to second it.
Angus, can you clarify what you're motioning for, please, for the purposes of the minutes?
Motioning what is on screen. So eRequesting coverage requires alignment with common use payment models for diagnostic requesting, pay, private, concession, public, bulk bill, and DVA. We're proposing to create a new minimal coverage value set for eRequesting that will start with those 4 codes. Create a new eRequesting diagnostic request coverage resource profile based on the AU coverage. So now we have control of the coverage resource to change as we see fit in our space, and add additional bindings minimum to the new eRequesting coverage profile referencing the 4 codes, or you could just say referencing the value set that currently has 4 codes, change AU requesting service request insurance reference to point to the new AU requesting coverage profile.
All right, and we got a second from that. Who was that who seconded?
Me, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. All right, so I'm going to put that up on the screen now. If you would like to vote for that motion, you can vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap that one up in 3, 2, 1. All right, and here are the results of that poll. 12 affirmative, 1 negative, and 11 abstained. 50% affirmative.
Okay. Move on to the next one. The next one's one that was discussed in last meeting as well. So this is the add MustSupport priority element to eRequesting. So we'll come back to that now and see if we can get a decision on it. This has been, all right, let's try and get it to open. So just to remind everyone what this is about. This was about the priority element on the AU eRequesting service request should be labeled with MustSupport so that a placer system can record the requester's intent on how quickly the service request should be addressed. Cardinality 0 to 1 and the terminology binding request priority required should remain, and the actual obligations would be populate if known for the placer, handled by the server and the filler, able to populate by the server, and no error for the patient access. So that I saw that there was a whole heap of debate around this one last week. So did during the week last week created a Zulip chat. I'll just put it in the chat here now too, so people can have a look if they want. To talk about, so people could talk about the issues here. I think some of the things that were brought up in the last meeting was around having multiple priorities in a hospital EMR setting. That there was the Phil, if you can butt in if I say it wrong, but there was potentially different priorities being able to be specified for collection as well as fulfillment, and trying to understand how that might work. So there was a chat where a number of people involved in this went around sort of we tried to bring it to a head at the end to see if we can get some consensus on this in the chat, which was around the priority element in the eRequesting service should be labeled with MustSupport so the placer system can record the request's priority of this service request compared with other requests. So that wording is reasonably generic, but essentially separates it from the task priority, which is managing fulfillment, and talking about this priority is around the request. So the placer has allocated this priority at the time they've created the request, and then the fulfillment priority would be managed through the task. That would expect them to be the same. There may be circumstances where we'll change, but we wouldn't get into all that. That's all something we can talk about, any rules around that later. I think to address the concern that was raised in the TDG in the last meeting around hospital EMR ability to specify different collection and reporting priorities, well, that's currently out of scope, eRequesting, because we're only looking at community. But this requirement could be met in the future by having separate tasks for collection and reporting with different priorities. So I think there's an avenue there that by making a decision here that we have a single priority on the service request, we could have as many tasks as needed related to that service request, and each of those tasks would have different priorities. So just coming back to, this has been reworded from what was presented, slightly reworded from what was presented last time. and that was around here. The priority element on AU requesting service request should be labeled with MustSupport. So Place System can record the request as priority of the service request compared to other requests. So it's very much about the request, the priority of this service request compared with other service requests. It would remain 0 to 1, which means if you're not specifying a priority, you don't provide it. It would have the same binding, and it's just the obligations. The placer would populate it if known. So if they have a priority that's known for this service request, they populate it, otherwise they won't. So does anyone want to, is anyone satisfied, or people satisfied with that, or want to continue the discussion that was held over from last week? Do we think that that addresses the concerns? If anyone doesn't?
I'm happy with the new wording.
Yep.
And I think we necessarily don't say anything about the filler.
Yes. Yeah, that's why I think you're being specific about this wording, about being the placer and service request. So it's very contextual on that. I think it was a really good discussion. I certainly watched the video last week, the last one, and it was a really good conversation to have. And it was a good process for us to go through and work out how this might work if there were multiple priorities. So I think it was a good process. But I'd like to motion then that we accept this as persuasive with modification based on the wording there that we've just gone through.
I'll second that, Heath.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll launch a poll for that. So we are voting on adding MustSupport to the priority element on the AU eRequesting service request as documented on the screen. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Thank you. Okay, we're going to close that one off pretty soon. 3, 2, 1. And that one has been passed. 19 affirmative, 4 abstained. Nice and easy.
Oh.
Thanks.
Wasn't last week. It's this week.
That's the way it goes.
Phil's not here this week.
We might jump to the bottom one here now, given I've got Heath here. I'm popping camera there. So this is about service request missing data not allowed. So okay. So this is something that was actually, this issue was raised by Heath, and it was something we did discuss at the Connectathon in Brisbane, the last Connectathon in Brisbane, around service request and missing data. In the group we had, it was just a breakout session we had in the Connectathon. The general consensus we had in that group that we kind of agreed that we shouldn't allow missing data extensions on any of the mandatory service request elements. And that was very much around that if we're making them mandatory, that it's information that is important for fulfillment, right? And if we're using an extension that says that the data's missing, then it will be hard to fulfill. So this, I'll just show you in the IG what we've got around this wording at the moment. I think it's general guidance. And I mean, that's a base. That's not going to help. Conformance, under conformance. Okay, mandatory elements. We have this statement here at the moment that mandatory elements are elements with a minimum cardinality greater than 0. When an element is mandatory, the data is expected to always be present. very rarely it may not be, and in this circumstance, see the guidance in AU Core on missing data. So this is what we're talking about here. And in the AU Core guidance, it's got this whole section on missing data. And there are situations when information, particular data elements is missing and the source system does not know the reason for the absence of data. So if it's optional data, like cardinality is less than 1, then you just you omit the element from the resource, don't provide it. But if it's mandatory, so cardinality is greater than 0, the element shall be present even if the source system doesn't know the value or the reason the value is absent. So AU Core is providing the guidance here that you would use the data. If it's a non-coded element, you would use the data absent reason extension and use the code unknown. So there's an example here where it's a patient with a birth date, and then the extension adds in here the value of unknown. For coded elements, it's used the appropriate unknown concept code from the value set if available. If it doesn't have unknown, then you must use a concept from the value set anyway. And I think that's about it. And there's also a section here on suppressed data about you can use missing data for suppressed data, or you can use masked from the data absent code system. So given AU Core is very sort of generic and not use case specific, this makes a lot of sense that if you don't know the data, there's a way to not provide it. For eRequesting, probably not so much, because we have very specific use cases and data is required to fulfill the information. So, all right, Heath, do you want to add anything to your reasoning there?
No, I mean, basically, we discussed this at the Connectathon. It was agreed by those that were there that the mandatory field's mandatory. You have to provide a value, otherwise it is useless to actually fulfill the order, the request. So basically, the proposal here is to remove that section that references AU Core about missing data, and to basically replace it with a section that says the opposite, that a mandatory element must be populated with a real value.
Yeah, so that's just in our conformance guidance.
So basically it's that section
this section here in eRequesting. We'll remove these references to the AU Core missing data and replace it with some new guidance.
Yeah, we don't have specific guidance yet or wording.
No.
But we will come up with that independently, but with this intent that effectively mandatory is mandatory with the real value, useful value.
Govinda?
If we are using some EU Core resources within the eRequesting, like patient and practitioner, will this be still valid, or we have to use missing in that case?
Basically, we're saying there is no missing data in eRequesting.
For all the resources that come around.
For mandatory elements. So if a requester is mandatory, so you have to provide a requester. The patient is mandatory, so you have to provide a patient. The test code or the request code is mandatory, so you have to provide a real test code. You can't just say unknown.
No, my question is more towards patient resource, where we have some few fields like TVA and other identifiers which are MustSupport but not mandatory.
So at the moment, we don't have a patient resource in eRequesting.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is the requesting profiles. Now, I think your question becomes valid when we get to the patient. If we create a patient profile and eRequesting, that's actually an interesting question at that point. There's not a lot of things that are mandatory in the patient resource.
One of the concerns that I found with the MustSupport, if we are not doing that missing thing, the validator don't catch that. They become very much like optional fields, and the server can't make it that whether the source system have that information, and that become totally liability. The liability become totally for the source system that they have to fill it. The server can't control that.
So is that an issue with the validator when you can support, when you can provide missing data, or when you can't?
When you can't, we are not adding any missing data information. Like if it is coming totally blank, server can't say it's optional or a missing or a must support element. Right? So it becomes same for server. But when we are going with the missing data, that there is a way for a server to detect that this field is a must support and there is some information coming in.
So all the mandatory fields are must support. So I think that's one of the criteria in must support. If it is mandatory, it's must support, right?
Yeah.
There is no mandatory fields that are not must support.
In the context of service request and task itself, yes, I think, but for other resources, it will become.
No, it's the same for AU core, that general principle applies. If it's a mandatory, but you can use the extension in AU core profiles, you can use the extension. So we're saying for eRequesting profiles that you can't use the extension. Andy, your hand's been up for
It's probably a similar concern to, well, I don't know, to Towender. It's I am a little bit wary of this going in now because of the unknown need for eRequesting profiles in light of obligations, and that if we actually have to end up creating profiles for anything that we want an obligation on, then we will have a lot of profiles, and this is basically unwinding any opportunity for all purposes going forward not to use missing data. And I would be more comfortable if we had got to a point where there was a set, and obviously the description here is talking about missing data in service request, but the resolution is talking about missing data in general, way beyond service request. And you know, if we only kind of say missing data and you can't have missing data in service request, I'd probably be okay given the structure of it. But I do wonder what we're going to do with things like, for instance, AU core patient, which we reference. I still don't understand how we're going to get to the obligation specifications without having a number of kind of layers of profiles that we have to add into eRequesting, and therefore we're basically taking this out for anything that's even referenced from any of the data.
Yeah. We're gonna have to defer this one because we've run out of time for today. But there is, I wonder if there's an opportunity here to reword this in a way that says unless explicitly specified, right? So that you're saying this is the general rule is you can't use it, but give us room to explicitly say this element will allow missing data, and the other way around, so that it's the general rule. We can discuss this on another meeting. We can carry this one over.
I agree. I think we do need to have some
just to close things out quickly. Another block vote will come out today, block vote 4. We're just going to finalize that in co-chairs meeting later today, and then that will come out. You'll get an email for that one. We'll we'll go through the outcome in the next meeting, and this is the meeting calendar for the rest of the year. So we've got another meeting to do ballot comment resolution. Then we've got the full day in person in Melbourne. Then on the 5th of December, we'll bring back to the TDG the outcomes from that meeting if you couldn't make it. And then the Connectathon in December, and there'll be one meeting before Christmas on the 19th of December at this stage.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I think that brings us to the end. All right, so we'll see you again on the 7th of November. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, people.
Thank you. It's Chris, Michael.
Thanks.